What is going on, guys and gals? Brooklyn Bound the Raid Scientist here, and today I'm going to walk you through all the strategies, tips, and tricks you're going to need to solo the new Spire of the Watcher dungeon. After the holidays, I finally buckled down and finished my solo flawless run, and I learned a lot of things along the way that I'm going to share with you, so you can be successful if you're just trying to solo or knock out the solo flawless of this dungeon. We're going to go through some loadouts by class, weapon selections, mod selections, and finally an encounter by encounter summary for solo players to maximize survivability. I am not going to go through all of the base mechanics and guides to this dungeon overall. You can find those in my full guide to the Spire of the Watcher dungeon linked in the description. As always, please consider subscribing to the channel if you find this video useful, and drop a like to help feed that infamous YouTube monster algorithm. Thanks again, and let's jump right into it. Okay, so first off, let's get into things like power level, stats, class selection, and subclass choices. For any class, you're definitely going to want to be at least 1590 power, if not 1600 plus. This is going to maximize your damage output against the combatants and bosses in the dungeon, and reduce the incoming damage for the most part. With the final boss being 1590, power level 1610 will give you the maximum benefit you can see. Can it be done at a lower power level? Of course. Is it easier at a higher power level? Of course. In addition, regardless of class, you're going to want to have at least 90 resilience, if not 100. While other stats may vary based on your class choice, resilience works the same across all characters. Maximize it will make your damage reduction up to 40% from all incoming damage. Now, obviously based on your comfort level, skill level, and experience, there are going to be many different options for subclasses that are going to work for this solo. If you want to solo the dungeon on an Arc Warlock, go for it. Have fun. With that said, by class, I think these are going to be the easiest and best options for survivability overall, and the breadth of abilities that this dungeon specifically requires. Also note, as you progress through the dungeon, you may find a specific area benefits you to run a different subclass with better results. Obviously, my recommendations are for overall success, but you may find it better to switch things up from encounter to encounter. For Titans, Sunbreaker with Soul Invictus, Roaring Flames aspects, and the Throwing Hammer. Be sure to try and map your charged melee separate from your uncharged melee so your hammer throw can be done with enemies right in front of you. For exotic armor, the Laurel Splendor Helm is absolutely S tier for survivability. This will generate sunspots that heal you anytime you're critically wounded or you cast your barricade. Synthoceps are always another good option as well, which will drastically improve the damage from your throwing hammer and give you extra damage on bosses if you have Roaring Flames ×3. Also, don't forget to bring your Lion Rampants with you for any of the jumping areas. You may want to consider switching from fusion grenades to healing grenades if you're having issues with staying alive as well, especially in the final boss room. For hunters, Night Stalker with Mobius Quiver. This will give you plenty of ways to go invisible, and will give you more time in many of the encounters to either regroup, avoid dangerous spots, or groups of enemies. For aspects, it's going to depend on your playstyle and your exotic armor choice. If you have Gearfalcon's Hauberk, which is a chest piece, you're definitely going to want to use Stylist Executioner, so you can literally go invisible, get volatile rounds, go invisible again, and keep cycling through invisibility. Make sure to use Echo of Persistence fragments to increase your invisibility uptime. Other exotic armor choices would be things like Akelous paired with Trapper's Ambush for invisibility from smoke bombs, or maybe even Wormhusk Crown, which will give you a bump in health every time you dodge to go invisible. On hunters specifically, prioritizing mobility stats so you can get your dodge and visibility back faster, and strength if you're using your smoke for invisibility to get that back faster. And finally, for warlocks, I think it goes without saying that Solar, Well of Radiance with Touch of Flame, and likely Icarus Dash are going to be your best choices. Heat Rises can have some viability, but I personally like having the Icarus Dash in a pinch to escape from supplicants or if I fall. Healing Rift or Phoenix Dive for healing, and Fusion Grenades can be great damage dealers to the two bosses, but consider swapping to Healing Grenades as well if you're struggling with staying alive. Using Starfire Protocol for the 2 bosses for extra fusion grenades is very powerful, but if you aren't using weapons with auto reload capabilities, Lunafaction boots aren't a bad idea either. Also, for the final boss encounter, use something like Karnstein armlets is very good because this will grant healing from melee kills. Players on PC or maybe newer consoles may even be able to swap between exotics between the circuit phases and damage phases to maximize their damage output. For mods, unfortunately we will see a ton of variance from season to season. For those doing this in Season 19, absolutely 100% make sure you've unlocked Solo Operative and Weakened Clear before doing the solo, because it just is going to make your experience that much better. Solo Operative increases your damage output when you're solo, and Weakened Clear reloads all your weapons and weakens the targets with grenade launchers. If doing this in another season, review your artifact mod options and look for options to either do more damage to bosses, weaken bosses, or improve your healing and survivability. As always, maximize your ammo economy with the correct ammo finders and reserves and scavengers. Put on Void Resistance mods or Seasonal Resilience mods on your chest piece, especially for the final boss encounter, which shoots void damage. Elemental Well mods are also extremely powerful in today's meta, both granting bonus damage from things like Font of Might and Elemental Time Dilation, as well as healing from Solar Wells and increased resilience with Void Wells like Well of Tenacity, and so on. Typically, you're going to want to pair your subclass and weapon choices with the Elemental Well you want to use. Solar Titans and Warlocks using Solar Wells with Solar weapons, and Void Hunters using Void Wells with Void weapons. For weapons and strategies, I will make suggestions as we go through each encounter, as they can vary differently. But before that, let's get into some overall tips that I highly recommend if you're newer to the dungeon or you haven't run a lot of solo dungeons. First and foremost, I highly recommend practicing the final boss room solo before you try to do the entire dungeon solo or solo flawless from start to finish. Remember that if you're going for the Triumph for the Wanted title, you're going to have to solo the entire dungeon from start to finish in one session without going to orbit. Often, people spend a lot of time getting up to the final boss and then struggle because they run out of time or patience. Do yourself a favor, grab some friends and get a checkpoint or find a checkpoint to the final boss and just mess around in there for an hour practicing the circuits, memorizing their locations, and how exactly you want to optimize your DPS. Secondly, as I just kind of mentioned, you really need to memorize the circuit and panel locations in all of the encounters, especially in the first encounter, the tower encounter, and the final boss room. Following the wires just slows things down. It puts you often in dangerous spots and will lengthen the encounters and lead to deaths. You want to take this element out of your run so you can just focus on the combat and staying alive. If you are also searching, hunting, and trying to figure out where the circuits are in a solo run, it's going to be painful. There are tons of diagrams on Reddit which show all the locations as well. So do yourself a favor and spend some time learning them before banging your head against the wall for hours and hours on these fights. They can already be very lengthy due to boss health pools, so don't make it even worse on yourself. Okay, now let's go through the encounters with all the tips and loadouts I can recommend. First, the opening encounter. I highly recommend something like Xenophage here, or at least a good sniper rifle or linear fusion rifle to take out those stupid Cyclops. While I do respawn, leaving them up absolutely makes things twice as hard, as they will constantly be spamming their void blasts and even pre-fire you if you're in one of the buildings. Take them out as they respawn as well. Secondly, pretty much just stay out of the middle alleyway for the most part. Keep inside the buildings or to the rooftops or behind the buildings pretty much the entire time. Thirdly, do not complete the circuits one at a time. As soon as you complete one circuit all the way, supplicants will start spawning and ruin your day. Instead, build all 4 circuits at the same time, avoiding the final nodes that are on the ground in the middle of the area. Then, once you're confident that they've all been completed aside from the final nodes, shoot all 4 final nodes at the same time to finish them, which will avoid supplicant spawns altogether. Once you have the circuits here memorized, this should really only take you a few minutes to clear. Once finished, swap to a sword, type of mobility gear you use for jumping puzzles, and a few ranged weapons like a scout, pulse, or a sniper to take out the hydras and the harpies. Look for some ammo bricks lying around and then jump down. You can use these ledges on the side of the fall down every so often to avoid breaking your legs at the bottom. As you traverse this jumping area, just take your time. Take out the hydras and harpies as they spawn, as well as the sniper hobgoblins that spawn across the ways. There's nothing too crazy here, it's a pretty easy jumping section. Moving on to the Ascend the Spire counter, personally, I keep on a sword here, and the same mobility gear from the jumping section. It isn't uncommon to make an errant jump or fall down, and these things can absolutely save you. Plus, a sword is great for taking out the minotaurs very quickly. In addition, Wither Horde is a great weapon for this encounter because the goblins are limited to small areas they can spawn, and you can drop some withering pools on the ground and take them out from safe distances. Once again, memorizing the circuit locations is going to make things much easier. There are some sneaky ones hidden below platforms and high up in the rafters. Finally, I'd also really recommend not killing the hydras at all, because doing so will just spawn harpies, and that just adds more chaos to deal with. The hydras will sort of just follow you around, so if they're bothering you, literally just make a big loop around the tower, and this should buy you 15 to 20 seconds before they can catch back up to you. There's really nothing else too crazy to cover in this section. It's by far the easiest part of the dungeon in my opinion. Alright, the first boss is where things are going to get a little bit more hectic. For weapons, you want a long-range damage option. At the time of making this video, linear fusion rifles are the best option to do this long-range damage, paired with something like a grenade launcher for a weakened clear debuff. In addition, you're going to want a good SMG with an SMG loader mod, or something like a traced rifle with a trace rifle loader mod, as these are going to be essential for taking out all the boss's red eyes at the beginning of the damage phase. This is going to be a fairly long fight, so you're going to need some patience and be prepared to do at least 5 or maybe even 6 damage phases unless you're just really going nuts on DPS. Some things to remember about this encounter is that every time you complete one of the fuel rod circuits, a set of harpies will spawn. These only spawn once per circuit, so it's highly advised to take all of the harpies out before finishing the last circuit and starting the damage phase. Secondly, the safest places are inside the catwalks furthest from the middle. You want to spend as little time as possible in the middle and up on top of the catwalks where the minotaurs spawn, because you're more exposed to the harpies, to the boss, and the minotaurs. When you start, kill the first minotaur, grab the buff, and then go activate all 4 circuits in the center. This will maximize your timer on your buff and allow you to focus on completing at least the first 2 circuits without needing a refresh, or maybe even 3 circuits if you have them all memorized and are relatively quick. After the 3rd circuit, as mentioned, take some time to clear out all the harpies before rebuffing with Arctrician and then doing the last circuit. At the start of the damage phase, drop a reload barricade if you're on a Titan, or a Well of Radiance if you're on a Warlock, and use your SMG or Trace Rifle to take out all the eyes. Then, quickly swap to your heavy linear fusion rifle to start burning him down. It's not a bad idea to create an elemental well from a goblin if possible, so you can use Font of Might to boost your damage. When doing damage, just stay back and damage him from range. While this will require some accuracy, this will avoid you getting hit with his boot blast after the damage phase ends. Another way to avoid his attack is to just drop down into one of the holes on the catwalk and it won't hit you. As mentioned, you're likely going to have to do a bunch of DPS phases to take this boss out. So stay patient, don't rush, make sure you clear out all the harpies, and you should be okay. Moving into the next section, you're going to be dropping down through the different airlocks and through the fans to the final boss. Make sure when you're clearing the ads out, you just do it up from the rafters and then drop down. In the first section, once you've got the Arctrician buff, you can see all 5 of the red nodes you need to shoot from this one location without having to jump down, worry about any of the ads, or the door that opens. Once you've activated them all, jump down into the first fan section. And note that you can use these notches to jump down through the fans without actually having to time the fan blades at all. Keep in mind, when you do this, you can't jump too high because you can hit your head on the fan blade above you and it will kill you. In this second section, same thing. Clear the ads from up top, then grab the buff, and go to this location where you can again see all 5 nodes essentially from the one spot without having to jump around. Get through the second set of fans to this final section. Note in here, the ads will keep respawning, so clear out the Hydra in the middle, grab a buff, and quickly try to get all 5 nodes. I highly recommend making the one in the middle the first one because it's the hardest to find, with the other 4 just being on the 4 walls. Alright, so Percy's the Thunder Chicken is the final boss, and by far the most difficult part of this solo due to the close quarters, lethality of the boss, self-detonating supplicants, which have definitely ruined more than one of my solo flawless attempts. For weapon choices, there are a lot of great builds to consider. I personally use Witherhoard as my exotic, so I can proc Weakened Clear this season and help clear out ads and minotaurs from a distance. I used a Akelous mini tool, Solar SMG, but feel free to use whatever primary you like. For heavy, I used a Demolitionist and Overflow rocket launcher, but auto-loading rocket launchers are also very good, like Bump in the Night, Tomorrow's Answer, etc. These allow you to fire a rocket, swap to a grenade launcher or a special weapon, then swap back with it reloaded and repeat. Other weapons to consider that are pretty good at the time of making this video are things like Xenophage and Grand Overture. Grand Overture may take a little practice to get used to how it works. Overall, this is why I recommended earlier to practice the final boss, and just getting a consistent way to do damage phase is essential to clearing this encounter solo. At Season, this is likely going to take you 4 to 6 damage phases to beat, which makes for a very long fight. It may take you a few weapon loadout variations to find something that works best for you. I would say that if you aren't able to kill him in at most 6 phases, you should probably think about optimizing your weapons and your mods to improve your damage. Now, tips for this encounter. First, and as I've said about 5 times now, memorize the circuits, like literally. If you can draw your own diagram of where the circuits are with your eyes closed, that's where you want to be. If you have to search, it's going to make things a lot harder. In addition, use the reactor room after each DPS phase to take out the Hydras safely. The boss, or the ads, will not spawn in here until the red circuit is used to open the middle door. The doors on the sides may be closed at the very start, but other than that they will never close throughout the encounter. Once the Hydras are taken out safely from this room, then I recommend taking out a Minotaur from a distance, and then sprinting in the room, grabbing the Arctrician buff from the pool, and be ready to clear out supplicants. I even use a rocket launcher to get the clustered supplicants that are together, a grenade, or even a Witherhoard. Remember that once you grab that Arctrician buff from the Minotaur you killed, you have a good 30 seconds to shoot the red circuits, so don't rush. Focus on clearing out the supplicant wave, seeing where the boss is so you can have a safe moment to just shoot the 5 red circuits and open the door. It can get kind of chaotic and you don't want to rush yourself and make a mistake. Once the door is opened, the ads will stop spawning in the first room, aside from the Minotaurs, and the goblins and the supplicants will now constantly keep spawning in the reactor room. You'll now need to just keep away from the boss. It's recommended to kind of dance between the 2 rooms to try to keep him away from you long enough to get all of the circuits. You essentially want to stay out of the middle part of the reactor room at all times. Use the outer catwalks to travel around, and this will keep you safer. One tip that helped me if you're struggling with this encounter is to literally just never turn around or really even stop moving. I cannot count how many times I stopped and turned around to go back the direction I came from, and behind me was a supplicant or the boss or a minotaur, and I didn't have time to get away. It's much easier to just jump over the supplicants you can see up ahead of you than to turn around and try to jump over ones that were chasing you down. As you get the circuits completed and start your damage phase, oftentimes there may be a random goblin or two in the first room you can use to spawn elemental wells if you're using a build for them. Do your damage phase, and then afterward immediately head back to the reactor room before the hydras respawn. There could be a stray supplicant still in here from the damage phase, but you can grab ammo, take some time to build up your super if you want, and take out the hydra safely. This fight is all about patience, not rushing yourself, and constantly staying mobile and away from danger. With enough practice, I have no doubt using these tips will give you the ability to solo this dungeon, claim your triumph, and take a deep breath after finishing. Best of luck in getting this done, Guardian, and thanks for watching. If you want any more tips or tricks or have any questions, drop them down in the comments, and I guarantee you I will get back to you. Until next time.